The Raspberry Pi Foundation sent me this box, and inside of it is the brand new Pi 400. This is the Pi 400 kit, which comes with a bunch of things, basically everything that you need to get started with the Raspberry Pi. This is the Pi 400, which looks just like a keyboard. In fact, it's the exact same size, shape, and style as the Pi keyboard. But if you look at the back, you'll see that there are vent holes, and on the back of the body of the keyboard are a bunch of ports. So this is actually a full Pi 4 computer, but it's called the Pi 400 because there's a couple differences which I'll get into soon. Also in this kit, you get the official USB-C power supply, which is helpful for giving power to the Pi 400. The official Raspberry Pi mouse, which is nice for being able to use a mouse if you want to control your computer that way. Technically, you could control it with just the keyboard. There's a SD to microSD card adapter, and the Pi 400 comes with a built-in microSD card. This is a SanDisk Edge 16 gigabyte card. It's an A1 class, so it should be pretty fast. I'm going to do some benchmarking and see how fast it is compared to all the other microSD cards that I've used in the past. So that's nice. And then also in the bottom of this box, there is an official Raspberry Pi beginner's guide, and this is a great book. If you've never used a Raspberry Pi, or even if you've used one before, it tells you all about how to set it up, how to use the software on it, and even some basic programming examples, some examples using electronics controlled by the GPIO pins. It's a really neat book, and this is the 3rd edition. I believe that there's a 4th edition coming out. This is a preview box that I got, and they obviously did not have the 4th edition complete by the time that I got this. But that's a nice book to have on hand when you're learning how to do everything Raspberry Pi. And in the back, don't forget this, there's the official Raspberry Pi micro HDMI to HDMI adapter. And this lets me plug the Raspberry Pi into any TV or monitor that has an HDMI input. So I'm going to put these pieces of packaging back in the box, and we'll get started with this Raspberry Pi 400. All right, so I have a monitor here. This is actually a TV from Insignia. It's just a TV that I had laying around with speakers in it, so I'm going to be able to test out how YouTube and other things work in it. So the first thing I'm going to do is plug my Pi 400 right into the TV. So let me see if I can find the HDMI input here. This is HDMI 1. And I'll just pop this right underneath. Right into this port. Now, one thing you might notice on this first edition of the Pi 400 is these 2 HDMI ports on the back are not actually labeled HDMI 0 and 1 like they are on the Pi 4. I have a Pi 4 over here also as an example, and it says that this one is HDMI 0 and this one's 1, and it's the same order on this board. You can tell that the port layout is different. But this is the first port. So this is the one that you'll want to usually plug into. And then this is the second port if you want to drive 2 displays or have a monitor and a TV or something like that. I have a teardown video where I go into depth. I basically take everything apart in here, and I show you the guts of it, how it all is put together. So I recommend go take a look at that video if you'd like. Anyways, I'm going to plug this into the first HDMI port here. So now I have it connected to my monitor. I'm going to grab this mouse out of here, take this little sticky part off, and there's the official mouse. And I'll plug the mouse directly into the back of the keyboard. Now, this is not a professional gaming mouse or anything like that, but it's an acceptable little mouse. I've seen much worse. So I'm going to plug the mouse into the USB 2 port instead of one of the USB 3 ports, because later I'm going to plug some USB 3 hard drives in there and make sure that the speeds are just as fast as they are on the Pi 4. So now we got the keyboard, well, the computer and the mouse, and the last thing is to connect the power supply. So here's the official Pi power supply. And it's important to use a good power supply, and that's why the kit includes this one. This power supply provides, let's see, 5 volts at 3 amps. And 3 amps is going to provide enough power for the Pi, for all the accessories you might plug in, and even things like external hard drives. If you use a lower quality power supply, your Pi might not get enough power and you'll have problems, you'll have errors, you'll see the little power icon appear on your screen sometimes. So that's always a bad thing. So now I'm going to plug this in, and I just realized that I don't have an extension cord over here and all my other plugs are taken up. So please bear with me for a second as I go grab one of those. Alright, so I got power, I grabbed my extension cord, and now I have the USB-C connector, and I believe that the Pi keyboard, the Pi 400, is set to turn on when I plug it in. It looks like that's the case. The power light came on, and it's interesting, this power light is actually a power and activity light. So when you're using the Pi, you might notice it flashing. That just means that it's performing some activity. With the Raspberry Pi 400, just like all the other Raspberry Pis, this light's actual functionality can actually be programmed, so you could change the way that it behaves if you wanted. So this is the first time I'm booting it up. I've actually torn this thing down before I booted it up, and that's a good sign. You can take it apart and put it back together and it will still work. So it's resizing the Pi file system, and now it's rebooting itself, getting everything ready, and we'll just wait for it to start up the first time here. Alright, so it says welcome to the Raspberry Pi desktop. Just like every other Raspberry Pi, when you boot it up, it brings you to this friendly UI. It automatically logs you in. There's a lot of things that I'm not going to cover in this video because it's basic Raspberry Pi usage, but like I said, this book covers all these important things like setting up your account and setting up security, and then getting to use the Pi tons and tons of different ways. Now for a few minutes in the rest of the video, I'm going to answer some questions after I've used the Raspberry Pi 400 for a few different tasks, and these are things that I think a lot of people who are interested in the Pi 400 might be interested to know. So I'm going to answer those questions, and then I also have a blog post. And the blog post is linked in the description, and it's in a card right above me. So go ahead and read that blog post. It's going to have a lot more detail, and I'm actually going to keep it updated as I go. I'm going to learn new things about the Pi 400 over the next few weeks, and I'll keep adding to that blog post. So please check that out. Please leave some comments in the video, and I'll answer some of your questions here, and any other questions you have, I might put them into my blog post as time goes on. All right, so here are some of the most common questions I think people have about the Pi 400. Will you please let Redshirt Jeff cut the Pi 400 with a hacksaw? No, Redshirt Jeff, just stop, okay? All right, how much does it cost? Well, the kit that I have with all these parts here, except for the monitor, costs $100, but you can also buy it for 70 bucks just by itself. I think that's a pretty good deal for all the different parts that you get. It's basically a full computer in a box, and I don't know if you remember the old iMac commercials where it's like you set it down, you plug it in, and you turn it on. Well, this thing has the same amount of connections as that iMac did, and it's a fraction of the price that it was, but it's also way more powerful and can do many more things today. So I think it's a pretty good value, especially if you're looking to get a second computer, or have a computer for one of your kids, or have a computer that you can literally grab the keyboard and go anywhere and plug it somewhere and be able to network with things. Also, it's the CPU in this is 1.8 gigahertz, which is faster than the Pi 4's 1.5 gigahertz. The question is the actual chip that's used in here different than the one in the Pi 4? That's interesting. It is and it isn't. They're both using the Broadcom BCM2711 system on a chip, but the Pi 400, I took it apart and I saw that there's a new revision to this chip. It's called a new stepping, and it's C0 instead of B0 in the Pi 4. So this new chip can actually control the CPU a little bit better. It gets a little bit better thermals for the same performance. So I think that's how they overclocked it a little bit from what was in the Pi 4. Also, there's a giant heat shield, and really you should go check out that video that I have, the teardown of it, and you can see the size of it. Almost the entire thing is basically a heatsink inside of it. And that heatsink can dissipate the heat, which I'll get to in a minute. Let's see, what ports does it have on the back? I'll go through the ports. I'll show you a little overlay here because I have it running and I don't want to just break it. First, it has a GPIO on the far left side, and that GPIO has all the same pins as a normal Pi 4. So you can actually use Pi hats and things like that with this, although you might need an adapter cable because it's literally on the back of the keyboard. Another thing you might want to do is put a little piece of tape over it just in case you spill some coffee on it and it kind of explodes, because there's actually some energized pins back here and it wouldn't be good to short them out. Or I think in the future the Raspberry Pi company might include some sort of cover for it. Then you have the microSD card slot, which I'll talk about in a minute. Then there's the two HDMI ports. You can use up to 2 monitors with this, and you can drive them, I believe, 4K at 60p, although your HDMI cable and monitor would have to support that if you want to do that. Otherwise, it works great at 1080p, which I'm using here. Then there's the USB-C power port, which can also be used for OTG to be able to control the Pi and access it from another computer, which would be an interesting use case for this little guy. Then there's 2 USB 3.0 ports that can put through 5 gigabits total bandwidth, although what I've found in my compute module reviews that I'm doing is that you can really only get about 3.2 gigabits per second total. So if you have a 5 gigabits per second device, like a super fast hard drive, you're only going to get 3.2 gigabits maximum out of it due to the way the PCI bus inside the Pi system on a chip works. Then there's one USB 2.0 port. The other port that normally would be on a Pi 4 is actually used by the keyboard internally. And then there's a gigabit Ethernet jack, which is cool. I think the Pi Foundation or the Pi company could have cheaped out here and not included that port and saved a little money on this, but I like that they included it. One thing to note is it doesn't have any activity or link indicator lights, so you might have to check on the computer itself when it's running to see if it's connected. That's a little annoying to not have those, but I'm guessing it's because that way this little connector can be a little bit cheaper and fit in here a little better. Finally, there's actually a Kensington lock, which is cool. One thing that's interesting about it is it's not actually connected to any part of the metal chassis inside of the Pi 400. So if you put a Kensington lock on here, a thief could probably pull really hard and just break the plastic off. But to be honest, for a computer that costs less than $100, I don't think that's going to be a big concern for most people, and most people that would want to use this would just want to deter people from trying to steal it quickly. So that's all the ports on the back, and it has plenty of connectivity. In fact, it has more connectivity on it built in than my MacBook Pro, which costs, I don't know, maybe 20 times more money than this thing. So not 20 times, probably, yeah, no, about 20 times more money than this. So that's a nice little victory on the Pi's side. How heavy is it? This is 384 grams, or if you're American like me, it's 0.85 pounds, so less than the weight of a pack of Twizzlers. And the regular Pi keyboard is 269 grams, so it's about 100 grams heavier than the keyboard, but really it's so light. The nice thing is that unlike the Pi keyboard, it's just heavy enough that it won't move around as much. That was one complaint that I had with the Pi keyboard, is sometimes when you're typing, it's so light that it would kind of move a little bit. How are the thermals? Is it going to overheat if you overclock it? Well, in my teardown video, again, go check that out. The heatsink is massive and it can handle a lot of thermal load, and that chip is newer and the chip can handle the higher speeds without getting as hot. So it's interesting, the Pi 400 typically idles, right now I'm looking at it, it's 33, 34 degrees Celsius. The Pi 4 that I have is usually 38 to 42 degrees Celsius when it's idle. So not only is the chip helping, but that heatsink is helping to dissipate that heat a lot. And I haven't done very long-term overclock testing. I plan on doing that with it to see if the keyboard itself can heat up a little bit. I'm going to try maxing out the network, maxing out the USB and the processor all at the same time for a few hours and see if I can actually get the Pi keyboard to heat up a little bit, and see if I can see that on a thermal camera. We'll see. But so far in my basic testing and the basic overclocking and a few short-term tests, it doesn't really overheat. It's kind of amazing how well designed the heatsink must be compared to on a regular Pi 4. Some of the issues that I've had with it overheating, and even the compute module 4. Let's see, how fast is the microSD card that is included with it? This microSD card isn't bad. It's definitely 1,000 times better than some of the no-name cheap ones that you get with a drone or something like that. But it's definitely not the best either. It has 17 megabytes per second sequential write when I use my DD test. It has 9.24 megabytes per second random read 4K and 2.13 megabytes per second random write. Now comparing that to all the other cards that I've tested, mostly in a Raspberry Pi 4, which is very similar to this with the same clock speed for the microSD card slot, it's in the middle of the pack. So it's not a bad card by any means, and I would be happy to use it for a computer that I'm using mostly to browse the web and things like that. But if you're going to do more disk activity, if you're going to save files to it, if you're going to do any videos work on it or photo work or anything like that, I would recommend either getting the fastest microSD card you can afford, which it would be a very quick and easy upgrade, a way to get at least 50%, maybe 100% more performance out of the disk right away, or for many times that performance gain, get a USB 3.0 hard drive, an SSD, and use that. It's way, way faster. And speaking of that, can you use USB boot to get better speeds and faster startup and all that? And yes, you can. It has two USB 3.0 ports, and you can plug in a hard drive or SSD to there, and you can actually boot off that and bypass the microSD card entirely. What kind of things could you do with it? Well, I mean, it's a computer. You can do anything you can do on a computer with it. Obviously, it's Linux, and I have another video that I posted a little bit earlier this year where I tried using the new Pi 4 8GB model to replace my MacBook Pro for a full day, and I got into it, and for a lot of things it can do anything that a normal computer can do. There are some workflows and things that I have using my media production tools and my Photoshop and things like that that you just can't do, and most of those aren't problems with the Raspberry Pi, it's just a Linux issue. But every day things are getting better, and another thing that's nice is that since Apple is moving to ARM processors, and since Amazon now has ARM processors and servers, a lot more software is available for the Raspberry Pi today that wasn't even available a year or two ago. So you can do a ton of things with it. You could use it for Zoom to do video conferencing. You can write documents on it. You can program on it. You can administer servers on it. One of the things that I'm planning on using this for is I will have it with me everywhere, and it's great that it has that built-in Ethernet jack. I can pop it into any network where I go and be able to connect to that network and do things on it, work on devices on that network. It's a lot more convenient for me to do this with a TV, which everywhere you go, there's a TV somewhere. And then I can do this, and I'll have my laptop, which I can do for other things. But this is great for that kind of purpose too. I don't think a lot of people use it for that. Most people will probably use it as their primary computer, the people that get it. But it is cool to think about doing that. Who do I think this is actually for? It's not necessarily for me. I don't know. I wouldn't call myself a maker per se, and I wouldn't call myself somebody who's deep into hardware stuff, but I do a lot of projects where I do want to integrate the Pi with some other devices, and I might need to use some GPIO. I might have a custom case for it. I might mount it someplace and not be using it. And you can't, I mean, a keyboard, you're not going to mount a keyboard on a wall and have a TV over here and be typing on your wall. You could do that, but I don't think that'd be that convenient. So the Pi 4 is still the most general purpose single board computer that I enjoy using. And the compute module offers its own type of form factors where you can plug it into other devices. And then you have the Pi Zero and things like that for low power consumption and a lot of other uses. I think that this is going to be best for people who want to use the Pi as a computer, which is a lot of people. Like for instance, this year with the pandemic, a lot of people had trouble getting access to a computer. This is a $100 computer inside a keyboard, and it's a decent quality keyboard and a good quality computer that can do almost everything that anyone would ever want to do on a computer. Browsing the web and watching videos and sending emails and writing and doing social media. And the great thing about it is it's running Linux, and you can really get into the system and learn how the computer works and program and things like that. I love that about the Raspberry Pi. So I think it's going to be really good for kids, for education, for a family computer. Another thing that I might do with this is just set it upstairs, and when I'm working on keyboarding lessons with my son, or when I'm showing my daughter how to program or something like that, I'm going to be able to use this, and it's really convenient and it stores really easily. Also, the last question, I guess, is do I like this? Would I pay $100 for this? For me personally, maybe. I think for a lot of people this is an instant purchase just because of the fact that it's such a nice convenient package for a computer. No longer do you have to buy one of these, set it over here, have a bunch of cables hanging out from it, maybe buy a case and then have to modify the case because the official case causes the Pi to overheat a little bit. But it's not going to be such a big ordeal to get one of these working. Literally, you take this out of the box, plug a couple cables in, and as long as you have a TV or monitor, which you can usually get one, you know, on Craigslist, I see them all the time for $50, $60, $70. For less than $200, you have a computer, a whole computer system that's adequate for almost anything that people do on computers these days. So I really like this. I'm happy with how it turned out. When I heard of the concept, I was like, oh, maybe they'll stick a Pi Zero in here, or maybe it'll be a taller keyboard and it'll just have like this on the back and sides. I've seen some people do that, but I like how they put it into the same form factor, and that also is helpful for the Pi Foundation because they have this top keyboard is probably the exact same hardware in the factory that they can make, and all they have to do is change the silk screen on top. So that saves them money in manufacturing, which saves us money when we buy these things because they don't have to pay more money to build a new product line. This is the same keyboard as the Pi keyboard, and the shell is a similar shell, so there's definitely a different mold there, but the engineering that goes into these devices I think is top-notch, and as a fellow engineer, one who's not into PCB design and hardware and things, it impresses me to see those things and not really have some of the weird flaky hardware issues and things on some of the other boards that I've had with the Raspberry Pi system. So great job, the Raspberry Pi Foundation. I think the biggest thing that detracts me from buying one is just the fact that it's stuck inside of a keyboard, and I like to be able to take my computer apart and modify it and change it. But anyways, like I said, please check out my blog post. It's linked in the description. Please check out my teardown video, and until next time, I'm Jeff Geerling. And inside of it is an A400. A400? It's not an A400. What is going on here? And now I can hear myself again. Actually, I can't hear myself. The recording device can hear myself. Anyways, drop this back here without knocking. Oh, there goes that. Time zone ADAC. Nah, that's not it. Ta-da!